Do we
Yeah.
know? Do we? And I can't try to remember this myself now. Any idea of casualty numbers among them?
Yeah. I could tell you that losses in federal service for 69th New York State Militia, this would count for sickness and everything else, but you had one officer killed. We know who that was.
Yeah.
37 men killed in action. 59 were wounded or mortally wounded. I'm sorry, 2 mortally wounded. So you would gross up your killed to 40, a round number of 40. You had 95 missing and 5 died of disease. So 95 missings would be probably taken prisoner,
Yeah.
or they just never came back.
And came back. So, and I suppose in this point of the war as well, like most of the prisoners were exchanged, like within that.
Yeah, it took a little while for them to figure that all out.
Yeah.
But it got pretty. I don't think that the formal exchange process of how many privates for a sergeant, I don't think that was
in place
until, and I think that was it O.C. Ord or Dix, one of the two of them. That I think it was developed during the Peninsula.
Right. Okay.
Campaign, when they were having all these problems. Here's a photo of some Irish soldiers, members of 69th New York, at Castle Pinckney.
Yeah.
In Charleston, which I got to go onto a couple years ago, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's all filled with pelican poop.
Right.
So the enlisted men were first held out there, and the officers were held here in the prison, the city prison, which is still there today.
Right. That's where Corcoran was.
That's where Corcoran was, and I don't know which window it was he jumped out of during the fire, but that's also where Wilcox wound up eventually. But around Christmas, there was a fire in Charleston, a big conflagration, and all the guards went off to fight the fire, and the prisoners were just left to fend for themselves. So they some of them jumped out the window. I think Corcoran was one of the ones that jumped out of his window, and they just fended for themselves through the night, and then went back the next day.
Of course.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Now, this is kind of this is interesting. So what became of the 69th New York State Militia and didn't? You want to move on to this now?
Yeah. Let's we're going to do aftermath and to kind of wrap it up for the last minutes. Cool. Yeah.
Well, let's remember that this was the flag of the 69th New York State Militia, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a flag that was presented by the citizens of New York to the 69th New York Volunteer Infantry. Okay.
Yeah.
And you can see here it's battle honors.
Yeah. And what isn't on it? Yeah.
What's not on
it? Yeah. No bull run.
Right, because the 69th New York State Militia would go back home and it would remain the 69th New York State Militia.
Yeah.
Unlike, say, the 14th New York State Militia, which went back home and actually became the 84th, I think, New York Volunteer Infantry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they enter en masse as a 3-year.
Right. So if you would refer to the reference book, the reference set, the Union Army, which gives you a little history of every regiment, you would find that if you went to the 14th Brooklyn, it would say C84th New York.
Yeah.
Okay. If you go to the 2nd New York, I think, same thing, whatever it became. But if you go to the 69th New York State Militia, it's there.
Yeah.
It doesn't say C 69th New York Volunteer Infantry, because what happened was when Marr got back, he set about raising a brigade of New York Irish regiments. Yeah. And the premier one was the 69th New York Volunteer Infantry.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any coincidence that they chose that name.
No, definitely not.
Reason.
Yeah.
Right? And notice, I can't remember who the first colonel of the 69th New York Volunteer Infantry was, but it wasn't Corcoran. And Corcoran was still around. So if it was the same regiment, it should have been Corcoran. Even though he was in captivity, it would have been a lieutenant colonel taking command until he got back. but that wasn't the way it was.
And it's worth mentioning, I mean, Christopher Garcia has done some fantastic work in this, hasn't he? And I mean, he looked at 69 New York State Militia, if I remember rightly. It's a while since I read it, but to see what the crossover rate was, and I think Christopher said that it's pretty low, the number of these men.
I have the number here. Let me see. I think it's 25%.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Was the number that he could trace. Now, a lot of them were prominent, which gives the support to the myth, because Nugent and a lot of the officers did go over. Let's say, Christopher Garcia estimates that it's even lower than 20. As few as 80
of the men
in the regiment at first Bull Run enlisted in the 69th.
Because there's a feeling, isn't there, that a lot of them are waiting for Corcoran to set up, and so they go. So there's a significant number going to, and I presume you're going to mention the 182nd New York here, which is kind of where and yet another 69th. You drowned 69ths in the war.
Right. When Corcoran came back in 1862, because he had been held a long time because of the Enchantress affair, he set about raising Corcoran Irish Legion. This is the flag of the Irish Legion. There's about 700 members of the 69th New York State Militia joined the Legion.
Yeah.
As members of the 69th New York National Guard Artillery, which would be designated 182nd New York Infantry.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, as I discussed with you, more or less discussed with me, because you know a lot more about this stuff than I do, that the Irish Brigade was never the political organization the 69th New York State Militia was. It didn't have a Fenian Circle. Corcoran Legion did. And by weight of the numbers of men that were in both units and by its political affiliation, the 182nd New York Volunteer Infantry had a much closer association with the 69th New York State Militia than did the 69th New York Volunteer Infantry.
No question.
But it's partly due to the influence of the United States Army, which has permitted the 69th New York State Militia, what today is, I'll let you know in a second what their number is. They're allowed to carry the battle honors. The battle streamers, you know what battle streamer is?
Yeah.
Okay, the battle streamers of the 69th New York Volunteer Infantry on their colors.
Yeah.
Okay. To the extent that it had to be, they had to get a special dispensation from the Army to make their staff a foot longer, so they could fit all of the streamers.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
And they do have a mark, we were mentioning it earlier, like it's still active. Active. And served out in Iraq and Afghanistan and everything in more recent times. I think they have quite a number. It's still very distinctly Irish. They have a lot of kind of almost Hispanic.
It's more heterogeneous.
Yeah.
Now than it was.
But
they are today. Today, they're the 1st Battalion, 69th Infantry Regiment, which consists of a single light infantry battalion as part of the New York Army National Guard's 27th Brigade Combat Team of the 42nd Infantry Division. Right. That's their official designation. They've seen combat in 4 wars: Civil War, World War I, World War II, and the Iraq War, and soldiers from the unit have also served in Afghanistan. It has participated in 23 campaigns, but that's including those of the 69th New York Volunteer Infantry. And I told you about the staff had to be a foot longer. And it actually, right after Bull Run, I think we should do that before we talk about that, and then we can wrap it up. Mm-hmm. This was a recruiting poster from later in the war. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can see that they were still in existence.
Yeah.
Still existed. I can't find, though, on May 29th, of 1862, they left the state to go to Washington, and they were mustered in for another 3 months. Colonel Corcoran being a prisoner at Richmond, the regiment went under the command of Major Bagley, which got him in more hot water. It served its term in the defenses of Washington, was mustered out at New York City, September 3rd of 1862. In the summer of 1863, at the time of Lee's invasion, 69th left the state for active service a third time. On June 22nd, it started for Harrisburg for 30-day service, again under now Colonel James Bagley, because Corcoran had resigned his commission in the 69th state militia to go about and raise the
Irish Legion.
All right. Commanded by James Bagley, and James Cavanaugh was its lieutenant colonel. Regiment served its term in Baltimore, attached to the 2nd Separate Brigade, 8th Corps, Middle Department, mustered out of New York City on July 25th. See, I can't get any confirmation that they were actually involved in the riots. Do you?
Yeah, no, I no, and I did look, not extensively, but a few years ago. It's actually something I must return to. Yeah, because it is an interesting.
Well, because it sounds like they were in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think they weren't back yet. Yeah.
Let's see. They came out a fourth time in 1864, and they served in the harbor of New York from July 6th to October 6th. And during that term, it lost one officer and one enlisted man who died of disease.
Okay, right.
That pretty much finishes them up for the Civil War.
Well, one of the things that's always interested me, I'd like to look a bit more at them, because I've come across a couple of them by chance, is the guys who were in the 69th New York State Militia go down to Bull Run, see what it's like on Henry Hill, and go, oh, I'm not having any part of this. Because there's definitely guys who don't, because we talk about a lot about the lads who go off to the 69 New York Volunteers, or the lads who wait for Corcoran to come out, but there's definitely guys who go, I'm done with the war. It's almost the opportunity is there for them, and it must have happened quite a bit. It's very hard to track, but very interesting for those 3-month militia guys who were down at Bull Run. I'd love to know. We'll never know this, but the numbers who kind of say this is not what I thought. I mean, I've come across. I came across one guy who served there in the 69 New York State Militia, and then he enlists in the Navy, I'm pretty sure, to try and avoid the draft in 1864, I think it is. But he obviously wasn't just going to be doing it again,
Right. What's interesting to me is, that 700 number that went into what became, the
Legion. Yeah.
Now they're not all going to have been at First Bull Run. I mean, there were men that were raised up into that militia regiment during the war, but that's after the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah.
You hear a lot of people say, "Oh, the Irish were really upset with emancipation." Well, I don't know, that kind of gives a lie to that.
Yeah.
If that many did go in, and they would find themselves in a much worse spot than they were in at Bull Run when they got to Cold Harbor.
Yeah. The losses the Legion was taken in 64 were horrific.
Yeah,
horrific. I mean, I'd love Christopher if he does return to it. I mean, I don't think they're in desperate need of a history. It'd be great to see it.
Yeah, a lot of it is kind of Irish. A lot of what we read is kind of like outside of St. Clair Mulholland and all those guys that wrote about the Irish. It seems to be kind of Irish glorification.
Yeah.
And it's written by Irish Americans.
Yeah, no, there's a big, and I think, generally the Irish Brigade is like a kind of, the Irish Brigade generally is almost like a black hole that sucks all lights into it in relation to Irish participation in the war. Anyway, you can see that, I think, with the 69 New York State Militia and how it's become. People, this kind of, it often gets mixed up with the Irish Brigade that comes, and you have the Irish Legion thing, but then this kind of general, there's really good examples of people like Marr being put up on a huge pedestal when, I think if we're being honest, he has a pretty questionable record as a commander, and I don't think there's enough explored about like what impact does things like the reality of Bull Run have on a guy like Marr. He's been It's really interesting. You think. So he was obviously he was done for treason in Ireland. He was the battle of the McCormick's cabbage patch and stuff was going on, but there was like about 3.5 shots fired in the rebellion. Like it's his first major experience. What type of impact is that having on him? As and he goes and sets up the brigade then, and then obviously 1862 happens. But like the type of impact it's having on them all on Cork, the impact it's having on Corcoran, and then the interplay of the politics between them all, I think, is really interesting. Like because they're Irish. You don't have to put too many Irish people in a room where there's kind of power machinations going on, and there's going to be arguments. And the Irish Brigade is by that.
Yeah, I think I came to. I read Tim Pat Coogan. Coogan?
Yeah.
A couple of his books, and even at the time of the Rising, the infighting among the different, the Fenian Brotherhood and the different, and then you had De Valera coming and saw how these guys are at each other, and I had read it, and sometimes that Marr and Corcoran's didn't get along, but then they were together when he died. I mean,
there was huge splits, and I think a lot of it, and again, there's more work needs to be done on it, because actually, and I make this argument, and you'll read at places where people talk about the Irish have been overstudied in the Civil War. I think they've been colossally understudied, to be honest, because there's not, like, outside of just looking at really obvious stuff, there's very interesting breaks and splits that happen that see guys end up in different regiments. Like the 42nd New York, for example, has a significant little cohort of Fenians in it. And why are they not all in with the other units? All these kind of his name escapes me now. He's killed at Gettysburg. Houston, who was a major Fenian, but like had an absolutely massive falling out with a load of the other guys just before the war, and it's deciding what regiment some of these fellas are ending up in. The 63rd New York in the Irish Brigade. Because they get a rumor that Marr is going to change the officership or dissolve the regiment or something, or threatening to mutiny. So there's kind of the official line that comes out with a lot of these guys. And I suppose that'd be one of the things I'd be interested in your take on, I suppose, to wrap up maybe, with the 69 New York State Militia at Bull Run, because there is this problem, I think, we just set the Irish, like the Irish Brigade at Fredericksburg. We often put them on this pedestal. And certainly the 69 New York State Militia at Bull Run would, to my mind anyway, would appear to be like one of the best known associated units with it. I'd be interested in getting your thoughts on the degree to which that is actually the case, like, or is that just because I read a lot of Irish? And I'd be interested in your assessment of how well they did or didn't do, or how exceptional or unexceptional they are in relation to other units that fought at Bull Run, like in a kind of a sum up of how you think they did and the legacy of it, I suppose.
Well, I don't think they did poorly.
Yeah,
that way. I think they were put in a really tough spot.
Yeah,
and part of that was that these brigade commanders really didn't know how to fight as a brigade. Most of them didn't know how to drill as a brigade because they hadn't been together all that long.
Yeah.
So they're put in there piecemeal. And I think you could say that it was inevitable that they weren't going to be able to hold that position because there was nobody to come back up and support them.
Yeah.
And there were more Confederates coming.
Yeah.
So I don't know that they could have held on much longer. There's criticism from a couple of people that they could have done more on Matthews Hill. I don't see it.
Yeah.
Given what his orders were and what they knew about the situation, I don't see it. I think they did pretty well holding together. They saw all those guys going in before them, and they still went.
Yeah. And they weren't the only people to be accidentally shooting their own side either, were they?
Right. Well, they weren't the only ones doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was happening all over the place. And I don't even know how effective their fire on the second Wisconsin was.
Yeah.
I have no idea. But I think they did as well as you could expect. as did pretty much everybody
Yeah.
on the field that day.
Yeah.
There were a couple little occasions where some commands, some New York commands, but mostly over in Blackburn's Ford area, were criticized by some of their officers. But no, I think I don't have a problem at all with how the 69th New York State Militia performed at First Bull Run. I just had an article published. I don't know if you read it, on seeing the elephant at First Bull Run.
Not yet. No, not yet.
It's in Civil War times, so I don't know how long it takes for that to get over there.
It's in the new one, isn't it? It's
in the new one.
Yeah.
It'll probably be online eventually. So I shouldn't say that. It'll never be online. Make sure you buy it. Dana will get mad at me. But it's about soldiers' first experiences. So you're going to read a lot of soldiers' first experiences that say, "Hey, I was really into it. I lost all concern for myself. I stood firm as others fell about me and ran away," or whatever.
Yeah.
But you're never going to read any of the letters from the guys who ran away, because they're not going to write about it.
Yeah.
So there'll always be there's going to be some self-serving in there. There are a few accounts where the guys weren't self-serving. The one was, "We laid as flat as flounders," was his statement. But these Irishmen, as you know, were very literate.
Yeah.
Very flowery.
Yeah.
And very sensitive, I think, in their writings. And were kind of admitted that, there were things that concerned them while they were on the field. They were worried, that they were scared, but they went in anyway. And considering what they had seen go before them on Henry Hill, I think they did pretty well.
Yeah, to do it, I often think about that in Civil War battlefields. How did they do that? How are they?
Yeah.
Well, how? I just don't know how anyone doesn't run away.
Yeah. But I did have, unless you want to explore that further, I did have a little wrap up on what their legacy is. And
Please. Yeah.
Okay. So this might be one of the first people we think of when we think of the 69th New York State Militia. He was the colonel of the regiment in the First World War, and his name is Bill Donovan. You ever hear him?
Wild Bill, yeah.
Wild Bill Donovan, right? So he was in the regiment. This fellow here was kind of considered a hack poet.
Yeah.
At the time he died at the Second Marne, and that's and I made a mistake when I was giving this presentation once. I said, "That's James Joyce." Of course, it's not James Joyce. It's Joyce Kilmer, who wrote that famous poem. I don't know if it's famous over there by you or not, but it's called "I Think That I Shall Never See a Poem Lovely as a Tree."
Yeah, it would be it's definitely known, although I've read in relation to him. So, but yeah.
It's a little maudlin, but schools across the country here in the United States, we had a day that used to be called Arbor Day,
right? And
the kids would recite this poem in class every Arbor Day. I don't even know if they have Arbor Day anymore. And here is Bill Donovan again with the chaplain of the regiment. You know who that is?
Yes, in Times Square as well.
Patrick Duffy.
Patrick Duffy, that's right. Yeah.
Right. And now that you mentioned Times Square, it's actually not in Times Square. This is actually called Duffy Square.
Oh, that's right. That is right. Yes, that's right.
And I think this is Times Square back here, the famous Coke Center. And then if you come towards the camera, I think that's another Irishman, James. Is it pronounced Cohan?
What?
James Cohan.
How do you spell it?
Cohan.
Cohen, I'd say. Cohen.
Yeah. He was played by Jimmy Cagney, and he was a Broadway songwriter.
Okay, right.
You guys don't know much over there,
right?
But he was played by Jimmy Cagney in the film Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Oh, wow. Okay, right.
Yankee Doodle Dandy. And to wrap it up with Jimmy Cagney again, this is the story of Father Duffy in the 69th New York State Militia in World War I, called the Fighting 69th.
Yeah, I still haven't ever seen that film. Actually, I must watch it.
All kinds of stereotypes in that one. You'll love it. This is Cagney as kind of a conglomerate character, representing a feisty Irish American, good for nothing.
Right.
Maybe he would have been in the 1st Louisiana Special Battalion
if he was back in the day. Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
Right.
It does have an amazing, like, I mean, I know a couple of people who have generational service in the unit all the way back to the Civil War.
Yeah.
Still people serving in it today. Like, it's amazing, that sort of legacy, which is something that you associate more, I think, with things like the British Army, you know, that kind of, you know, the long history of the unit. Because even in the American military, really, you kind of, certainly I would be guilty of this. You kind of think of a Second World War onward lineage, don't you? You know, the kind of like kind of the paratroopers or whatever, you know. But to have the Civil War.
Yeah, we tend to think of the units that these guys are serving in as, I got a guy from Brooklyn, I got a guy from a farmer from Iowa. Who is, when he dies, he's going to be saying this ground's not good for anything, and then he's going to die. Or you got a guy from California who just showed a picture of his girlfriend, which means he's going to die soon.
But you know,
and I was I was helping a guy with a tour once at Gettysburg, and they had some of his students there. And I was trying to explain to them how, you know, did any of you guys go to a high school that only had like 100 people in it? And he said, yeah. Well, imagine if half of them were with you in this unit.
Yeah.
And maybe the unit, the whole regiment only takes 50 casualties, but if they're all from your company, then they're all from your hometown.
Yeah.
And how devastating that would be.
The impact it has is colossal on a community. Yeah. That's actually
and not that when National Guard units get called up now, things like that don't happen, because, you know, National Guard units, there are a lot more locals in a National Guard unit. So I think when there was a Scud attack, I think in the first Desert Storm, you know, Desert Storm was the first one, right?
Yeah.
That hit a support unit that was made up of National Guard, and they were all mostly local people.
Yeah.
It hit like their mess tent or something, I remember. And I'm probably going to get into trouble for not remembering specifically who they were, because they were not far from Pittsburgh.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But yeah. Well, and then there's all, you know, it just recurs again and again, like the Bedford lads for D-Day as well.
The Bedford boys. Yeah.
Bedford boys.
Because that was the 69th Virginia. No, not 69th, 116th, I think. They had Stonewall Jackson. Their shoulder patch had Stonewall Jackson on it.
Oh, right, okay.
I think they were part of that Bedford boys. Yeah, I think I wrote an article on it at one point.
Right. Yeah, no, it just continues. As an aside, actually, you'll have to, if you have any. I've been looking for ages for a decent book on the American experience in the First World War, actually, but I can't find one. If anybody knows, this is a separate appeal. I'm kind of blue in the face looking for something decent on that encompasses all the First World War lads. But in any event, I suppose we should bring it to a conclusion.
Yeah.
We've already
trying to find a photo of that shoulder patch for you, but
they were 29th Infantry Division, was it? They were they in the Infantry Division? Yeah.
They're from Virginia.
Yeah. Another fascinating period. Anyway, yeah. Listen, Harry, that's been fantastic. Thanks so much for
I'm sorry we went so long.
No. I think it'll be interesting.
You have to do a part 1 and part 2.
Yeah, it's a good double the price of content. So that's perfect. And we've already been doing discussions about maybe doing something a bit different for another one of these. So, but thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks to Harry for his time and expertise. It's been absolutely fascinating. So we'll see you for the next chat.